We know that at this time of the year, we are noig some minhagim of Avelis. We spoke a little bit about this last week. The Gemara in Yevamos famously, Samach Beis tells us that between Pesach and Shmooze was a time that the Talmidim of Rabbi Kiva were nifta, and it was a time of sakona for the future of Torah for Klal Yisrael, and therefore we're noig minig Avelis. The Gemara tells us the reason. The Gemara tells us why they died specifically at this time. And the Gemara says something that we've mentioned before, Shaloinagu kovad zelozeh. Because, in the simple translation on a surface value, is they didn't treat each other with the utmost respect. Whatever that means, with dealing with Ga'oinei Olam, Tzadikim, these were mamash the future of Torah for Klal Yisrael, but yet there was obviously something very, very small, very darkistic, very sensitive. Shaloinagu kovad zelozeh, and because of that, the world was plunged into some kind of darkness. The future of Torah for Klal Yisrael was at stake, and therefore, because of that, we are noig many minhagim during Sefira of Avelis to remember that time, to remember the situation that Klal Yisrael were in at that time. Which is interesting, by the way, because if you look at many of the Gedolei Rishonim and Achronim, prominently the Ramban, for example, in Parshas Emor, the Rabbeinu Bechaya also in Parshas Emor, that say that the days between Pesach and Shavuos are days of like Chol HaMoed. It's mamish k'choyle shel moed. Lashon of the Ramban. It's unbelievable. We're dealing with between Pesach and Shavuos is almost like a yontiv. From Pesach all the way to Shavuos is like a Chol HaMoed. But yet, because the Talmidim of Rabbi Kiva died, we are noig minig Avelis. So, I want to give you this week, Be'ez Hashem, a slightly different mahalach, a slightly different pshat in the Gemara, which I think is very negay for every single one of us. And I think every single one of us, specifically at this time, has what to work on in this inyan. And that is the Shita of the Marsha and the Shita of the Maral. Those are the two Shitas. Last week we spoke about the inyan of Shaloinagu kovad zelozeh, which our Pashtus means Ben Adam Lechaveiroi. They were lacking some sensitivity in being careful how to respect one another, how to make sure they don't hurt one another, to be sensitive to one another. We spoke about that last week. Rabbi Yerucham Olshin Shlita brings in his beautiful Sefer Yerech Lamoyadim from the Marsha and from the Maral a completely different mahalach. And it's an important mahalach, which again at this time I think every single one of us have what to work on in this particular inyan. Zug the Marsha, and again you look this up, it's the Marsha in Yevamos Daf Samach Beis. The Marsha learns a different pshat in the Gemara, and the Gemara says that the Talmidim of Rabbi Kiva died. Shaloinagu kovad zelozeh. What does that mean? How does the Marsha explain Shaloinagu kovad zelozeh? I'll read to you the Lashon. This is the Lashon of the Marsha in Yevamos Daf Samach Beis and Beis. V'lo chosh kol echad mehem al kovad Torah shel chaveiroi. Lashon of the Marsha is, and he continues, de'ein kovad ela Torah. Lashon of the Mishnah Pirkei Avos Perek Vav Mishnah Gimel. De'ein kovad ela Torah. Zug the Marsha, the yisoid of the aveira, the yisoid of what they did wrong to deserve such a fate of being killed with such a horrible death, was not that they lacked in Ben Adam lechaveiroi, which is what the Pashtus is and what most people say, which is got plenty of marmakomis, and we have to work on that also. But says the Marsha, what they were lacking was a problem in Ben Adam lemokoim. That was the chisaron. And the Maral says the same thing. The Maral says in Chedusha Agodas, again in Yevamos as well, Samach Beis, Lashon of the Maral, Veheim lo nosnu kovad la Torah, linoi kovad zebozeh. Of course, there was a problem, Shaloinagu kovad zelozeh. But what does that mean? What's the deeper explanation, Shaloinagu kovad zelozeh? Says the Marsha, says the Maral, it's much deeper than just a Ben Adam Lechaveiroi problem. But there was a problem according to the Maral, according to the Marsha, they're saying the same thing. That not mitzad ben Adam lechaveira, but more mitzad ben Adam lemokim, that they weren't properly mechabed the Torah. That was the problem. And this idea of being mechabed the Torah is an important idea to understand that the obligation to mechabed a Talmud Chacham, someone who learns Torah, is mitzad the Torah that he's learning over there. And just like a person has a chiyuv to mechabed the Torah, he has a chiyuv to mechabed someone who learns the Torah. But it goes deeper than that. Many of us are familiar with the Gemara in Makis Daf Chaf Beis Amud Beis. The Gemara in Makis Daf Chaf Beis Amud Beis tells us, Omar Rabbo Kama Tipshoy, there are fools out there, that they stand up, a Sefer Torah walks in, they would never sit down. They would never keep seated. They would stand up a moment. The Sefer Torah is walking around. Sefer Torah walks into the Heichel, comes out the Orna Kodesh, whatever it is, they're standing up straight away. As I state in the Gemara. But in front of an Adam Gadol, a Talmud Chacham, that we don't have to stand up. That's fine. And that the Gemara says is a tipshoy, it's a foolishness. There's a problem over there. Explains the Maral Nesivus Olam, explaining Pshat in the Gemara in Makkas. What does that mean? The Maila, says the Maral, the Maila of a Talmud Chacham is not that it's a person that learns Torah or a person that knows Torah, says the Maral. That's not the Pshat. It's not that this guy knows Torah or this guy learns Torah. That's not the Pshat. I'm reading you now the Lashon of the Maral in the Sivas Olam. He says in Parak Yud Aleph, he says, Ki Talmud Chacham Kamoi Etzem HaTorah. In other words, he's not a person that knows Torah. Zuk the Maral, he is Torah. He's a shtick Torah. He's a chayfetz of Torah. That's what's going on. I'm not mechabed him because he knows Torah. I'm mechabed him because he's a piece of Torah. He's a chayfetz of Torah. That's why I'm mechabed him. And that's what the Maral says. The Maral says this so clearly, explaining the Gemara in Makkas, which again is the same mahalach as we explained the Gemara in Yevomis as well. In other words, what the Gemara is telling us is an amazing idea, and this is what the Maral is explaining Pshat in the Gemara in Makkas Daf Chaf Beis. What does it mean when the Gemara says that a person is a fool when he gets up for a Torah but not for a Talmud Chacham? And the Gemara brings a raya. What's the Gemara's raya? The Gemara's raya is the Torah says, Arboim, that when we whip someone lashes, malchus, we give them 40. As I state in the Torah, it's Mefurish Pasuk. It says it in the Torah. But what a Chazal come along and say, no, it's not 40, it's 39. Wow. Says the Maral. What is the Pshat? The Pshat over here is that you see from this Gemara that Chachomim, Talmidei Chachomim, they are be'etzem Torah. Why? Because if they weren't able to change that which the Torah says. They can't take that which the Torah says, 40 Malchus, and say, no, it's 39. But if they're a shtickle Torah, if they themselves are the Torah, then yes, the Torah can go along and say, I'm going to explain to you what the Torah means. Mimela, says the Maral, the chiyuv to be mechaber to Talmud Chacham is not because he learns Torah, is not how much Torah he learns, is he is the Torah. That's the chiyuv. And that, says the Maral, is what's going on. And we see that so many times. The ideas of being mechaber to Talmud Chacham. And now we understand maybe a little bit of the Marsha and the Maral, how they explain the Gemara in Yevomis. Shaloi nogu kovod zeh lezeh means they were lacking something in the kovod of one another based on the Torah, meaning the fact they weren't mechaber the Torah properly if they weren't mechaber each other properly. And that was a problem. It means that the time of the Talmidei Rabbi Kiva, at the time between Pesach and Shmooze, was a zman that there was a problem, there was a minimization, there was a lack in kovod Torah itself, not just each other. And that's something that we have to work on in this case, which is why the Marsha, the Maral explain, and we can understand why they had such a death, Why? The worst type of death, the Gemara says. The worst type. Out of all the types of deaths that are available, the Rabbeinu Shalom chose the worst type for the Talmidei of Rabbi Kiva. I'll tell you the Lashon of the Maharsha why. Explains the Maharsha. And again, you look this up, Yevama Samach Beis. V'lakach mesu b'mida zu, says the Maharsha, that's why they died in this manner. Ki hi chayecha, Lashon of the Pasuk of Mishlei Perek Dalet. This is life. Torah is Chaim. Torah is life. Ki hi chayecha. Mimela, if you're not mechaber the Torah, you're not zoicha to life, because the Torah is Chaim. It's life. And if a person is not mechaber the Torah properly, he's not zoicha to life. That's the Lashon of the Maharsha, which is why the Talmidei Rabbi Kiva died. Which is why it's on us at this time to be mechazik ourselves, specifically in that which they were lacking in, which was the covered HaTorah that is within a Talmud Chacham and someone that learns Torah. There's a Moedik, a Mishnah's Rabbaran. The Mishnah's Rabbaran in Chelik Aleph brings, if a person wants Hatzlacha in Torah, people are looking for Hatzlacha, they're looking for eitzes. How can I enjoy? I'm not chapping it, I'm not connecting to it, I'm not enjoying it. How can I enjoy the Torah more? Zuk Rabbaran, Mishnah's Rabbaran, you look it up, Chelik Aleph Omid Nun Beis. Rabbaran writes over there, and I'll just quote you some of the Lashon. If you want to be Zoichet to Torah, Tzorich lechabed ha-Torah karoi. You have to mechabed the Torah. It doesn't only mean standing up when a Sefer Torah gets out of the Aron HaKodesh. Avada also. But not only. To be mechabed the Torah according to the Maharal, according to the Maharsha, in the Sugya that we're learning means to be mechabed those that are learning the Torah. Because they are a shtickle Torah. And therefore, the Talmidei of Rabbi Kiva were lacking. And that was something that we have to learn. And that's why Chazal told us, so that at this time, every one of us can learn a lesson and be mechazik. Dishonoring a Talmud Chacham is not only a bizoyan to the Torah, a disgrace to the Torah, it's actually dangerous. Physically dangerous. There are many, many stories and accounts of people that suffered terrible, miserable lives and circumstances in their lives because they stood up against the Rav or they disgraced the Talmud Chacham. It's the opposite of emunah. I'll tell you the Lashon of the Stipler in his Sefer, in the Hagdama to the Sefer Chaya Olam. The Hagdama to the Sefer Chaya Olam, the Stipler writes over there that the beginning of all kfira is the disgrace of a Talmud Chacham. When a person is mevazeh Talmud Chacham, when a person is not properly mechabed a Talmud Chacham, that can result in terrible, terrible things. And it's the beginning of kfira, is the Lashon of the Stipler in the Hagdama to Chaya Olam. I'll tell you a Maisa. Rebellion Be'vachtboigel Shlita brings down the following Maisa. He said over this Maisa, he said over Gavaldiga Maisa. He said he heard this Maisa from an elderly man he met decades ago in New Hampshire one summer. And he met this fellow who told him the following Maisa. And he said, most of his life the man was not religious. In his 80s, he started to return back to his roots, started to become a Baal Tshuva. The man said he came from the city of Dvinsk, where the Or Sameach lived. The Or Sameach lived in that place, and he was the Rav, Godel, Talmud Chacham, Tzaddik. And the man's father had a very close relationship with Rav Meir Simcha. And they would often walk him home from shul, because he was very close to the Rav, so he walked him home from shul to his home after davening, whatever. One Shabbos, this is the story that he told over. One Shabbos, they were walking together. A young man approaches them with a lit cigarette in his mouth, Shabbos morning. Now at the time, the youth over there were being very much influenced by the scholar movement, and unfortunately, Rahman al-Islam, there are many Yidden who fell for the trap, and they started throwing off Torah and mitzvahs. And this was one of these boys. These are one of the boys that unfortunately got into the trap of that scholar movement, and he had a cigarette on Shabbos morning. And he stepped forward, approached the Rav, Rav Meir Simcha, and while he was smoking, he blew the smoke into the Rav's mouth. He blew it into his face, causing the Rav to cough. Rav Meir Simcha looked at him and he said, "You want that I should choke? You should choke." the story goes, and again, Rabbi Eliezer said it over clearly. He said following that hour, that whatever it was that day, that little boy came home, ate something, choked, and died. That was the Metzias. That's what happened. When you disgrace and you mavaza a Talmud Chacham, that is what goes on. The Chacham Tzvi, when the Chacham Tzvi was the Beis Din of Amsterdam, one of the heads of the Kehillah, known then as the Parnas, very much did not like the Chacham Tzvi. Didn't like the Chacham Tzvi for whatever reason. He had problems with the Chacham Tzvi. Chacham Tzvi, Goy Noilam, Tzadik Oilam. Now the Chacham Tzvi Ki Yadua, when he would Makabel Shabbos, would do so with Azaz Simcha, with a joy, dancing up and down, clapping and singing, and it was an unbelievable sight to see the Chacham Tzvi Makabel Shabbos Kodesh. But there was one man, this Parnas, this head of the organization of the community, didn't like it, and didn't like the Rav in general. So he used that as an opportunity. He once stood opposite him during davening, and he started to make fun of the Rav, the way he danced, the way he clapped. He started to make fun. The story, again, this is recorded in Sefira Magdoshim. The story goes that the people in the shul witnessed the man who made fun of the Rav immediately, on the spot. They witnessed it. Became crazy, couldn't stop dancing, couldn't stop clapping. He became Meshuggah, and that's how he ended his life for many, many years. Became a complete Meshuggah. Because why? He's Mavazah Talmud Chacham. One last story, Rabbi Yisrael, we'll end with this. In Slukst, the Rav was Rabbi Yaakov David, the Ridvaz. The Ridvaz was the Rav. Rabbi Zalman was the Rosh Hashiva. And there were a group of people who decided that they weren't happy with the way that the Ridvaz ran the Beis Din and ran the Mahalach HaPsak in the town. We're going to appoint our own Rabbonim. We're going to appoint our own Dayonim for the Beis Din. We're going to make our own Beis Din. We're going to do it our way. The Ridvaz heard about it. He was infuriated. He couldn't believe it. How can they do that? You have to remember, in those days especially, we don't have it so much nowadays, but in those days there was one Rav, there was one Rosh Hashiva, there was one Das Torah over there. Nobody messed. He was in charge, and the Ridvaz was the Ridvaz, and Rabbi Zalman was Rabbi Zalman, not Stam. But these people decided they know better. So they're going to appoint Rabbonim and Dayonim instead of what the Ridvaz decided. So they did it. The Ridvaz heard about it. So he said like this: I'm calling a meeting, the entire town. I want everyone to be in the shul, men, women, and children. I have something to say. Everybody gathered together. The olim is packed. The Ridvaz walked in, it was silence. He gets up on the bima and he claps and he says the following. He said, if Yaakov David was a shoemaker, they never would have done it. If Yaakov David was a silver maker, they never would have done it. The only reason they did it, Rabbeinu Shalom, is because I learned your Heilige Torah. Rabbeinu Shalom, my covet, I'm Moichel. I'm Moichel, my covet. Oh, but the covet of your Heilige Torah, I'm not Moichel. And I am paskening that these Yidden that appointed Rabbonim without my permission will die within the year. You can imagine the place was in an uproar. How can it be all of these Yidden? Some of them were known as Choshev Yidden. What do you mean die? Rabbi Zalman went white. Could you say such a thing? So Rabbi Zalman went over to the Ridvaz. He said, Rebbe, maybe it won't happen. And there'll be a Chil Hashem. People don't chap what you said and it. The Ridvaz says, you know what? You're right. Gets back on the bima. Everyone's quiet again. And he says, Rabbi Sai changed my mind. I'm paskening that the Yidden that did this without my permission will die within 3 months. This way everyone will know it was because of this. And kachava. They died, every single one of them, within 3 months. Rabbi said, this is the time that we have specifically to work on Shaloi Nagu Kovod Zelazeh. Explains the Maral, explains the Marsha, to Machabed the Talmud Chacham. Someone that learns the Torah, that knows the Torah, not because of what he knows and what he does, but because he's a piece of Torah. And that's what we have to masakin at this time. And the Rabban Shem should give us siyata d'shmaya to come to Shmooze, to real Kabbalah Torah, with the emes work that we worked on this Indian, so we Makabel the Torah, ba'ava, be'ez Hashem shkoyach.